Welcome back, everybody, to another exciting episode of Aaron's Opinion, the podcast for blind people, where we speak about critical issues in the blindness community and all other issues from across the universe and galaxy. Today, we're going to be talking mostly about the importance of including people with disabilities around the podcast space. That's why we're joined by Pod Access. They're here right now, and I just want to basically turn the microphone over to you guys to, for one, go over your life story, who you are as people, how you developed Pod Access, what's going on at Pod Access, and how can my global audience know all the great stuff you guys do. I'll mute my microphone. Go.
You want to start your life story there, Cheryl?
Sure, I'd be very happy to start my story. Okay, it's going to be a slightly condensed version.
Slightly.
Yeah, so I was born on a military base in North Carolina. Actually, tomorrow's my birthday, but okay, now let me jump ahead. I'm Cheryl Green from Pod Access. Thank you so much for having us on today. I describe myself as a chronically ill, disabled access artist. I specialize in captions and audio description for films and museums. I'm formerly a documentary filmmaker. I made some documentaries and a few short fiction films, all related to disability art and disability culture. Not doing that so much anymore, but I do have a podcast called Pigeonhole, which is kind of a disability arts and culture podcast. And rather than go too much in depth into my life story, I'm going to wrap up with just a self-description. I'm a white woman, a Jewish Ashkenazi white woman with olive complexion, curly brown hair, and white and silver cat eye glasses. And I'm in one of my home studios, and I want to pass it over to my colleague, Thomas.
Well, thank you, Cheryl. And may I be the first to say happy birthday to you on Aaron's Opinion.
All right, you're the second.
Oh, the second? Oh, okay. Well, damn it.
Yeah, Sam got to me because she mistakenly thought today was my birthday. So okay. You and Sam are the first.
On Aaron's Opinion, I'm the first on the podcast. So
you're the first. Thank you.
Awesome. I'll pick up where you left off. So my name is Thomas Reid, and I'm a brown-skinned black man with a smooth-shaven bald head, full neat salt and pepper beard. And I'm wearing dark shades and a black zip-up hoodie. And I'm seated, I'm standing in my vocal booth in my home in the Poconos, which is in Northeast Pennsylvania. Only 90 minutes from the place I will always call home, and that's the Bronx, New York. I am the host of Read My Mind Radio, which is a narrative podcast where I use storytelling, music, sound design, to introduce you to compelling people impacted by all degrees of blindness and disability. And occasionally, I share some of my own experiences as a man adjusting to becoming blind as an adult. I'm also an audio description narrator, consultant, and advocate. I work both freelance and as a member of the Social Audio Description Collective, where I also serve as project lead, audio mixer, editor, and occasionally blind quality control. And I'm also co-founder of Pod Access, which is what we're here to talk about. And I guess I can go right into that if you like. Since you turned it over to us, Aaron, maybe I'll just go right into it. Tell you a little bit about Pod Access and how it got started. I think I'm assuming that you have a lot of folks in your audience who are probably familiar with Alice Wong. Alice is the founder of a successful podcast and online platform called Disability Visibility Project. The mission of DVP is to amplify disabled voices. And that really is the root of this project. Alice wanted to do something for other disabled podcasters and had some funding to get it started. So she invited Cheryl and I to expand on this idea and build it into something that we thought would serve the community. I was a guest on Alice's podcast at one point, and she was also a guest on mine. So that's how she and I were familiar. Cheryl, how did you know Alice?
I first learned about her when she started the Disability Visibility Project with StoryCorps. That was back in 2014, because StoryCorps, people can record across the country, and they have themes and they have tags to identify various groups. And there was no specific tag or group marked for disability. And she was ready to change that. So she partnered with them and formed the Disability Visibility Project. And then it didn't end. It was so successful collecting the stories of disabled people who visited the locations. Like I flew to San Francisco to record for DVP and StoryCorps, but then they had a mobile app, and she just really got so many people connected across the country, and nobody wanted DVP to go away after. Like it was a celebration for the Americans with Disabilities Act anniversary that this partnership was supposed to sort of, I don't know, be centered around. I may have described that a little wrong, but it kept going. So I forget which year, but I had Alice on my podcast to talk about quote unquote good radio voices, because her voice was not then and still is not the typical kind of voice you hear on the radio. So she came on to talk about a disability perspective to radio voices, and how people with voices that sound like hers are often not invited onto the radio or even onto podcasts. And she started her podcast very shortly after that, and she hired me as an editor, producer, and transcriber for the Disability Visibility podcast, which ran for 100 episodes. Really exciting. Yes.
So, and they're still there. So if you're not familiar, you can absolutely go check out that podcast, because it's evergreen pretty much. So, yeah. So I guess we could talk a little bit about the benefits of podcasting. I don't know, that was something that I think we all had in common, right? Cheryl, Alice, and I, we were really familiar with the idea of podcasting, the individual way we benefited. But I think, there are other benefits that come around for the community, right? So, yeah, I don't know. In addition to talking about our creativity and just sharing our stories, there's so much out there from that. I don't know, Cheryl, you want to expand on that, or?
Well, sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I think those are great goals in and of themselves, to like get your perspective and your story out there. Podcasting is so popular, but I mean, people gain financially, politically, socially. There's so many connections that are made. Alice's podcast, for me, editing and producing and transcribing, that was a paid gig. I know podcasting doesn't usually come with pay, especially for indie podcasters, but that is one of the real benefits that can come from it. And I don't know, Erin, we're on your show. It's not just the Cheryl and Thomas show, but I mean, what are some of the benefits you get from having this podcast?
I would say the benefits I get from having a podcast is that I know that I'm doing the right thing. And for me, that's really important. There's a lot of karma behind podcasting. And if you're doing it for the right reasons, that's the right way to do it, So I got into podcasting about 5 years ago at the height of the pandemic, because I specifically noticed and felt and still feel today that there really are not enough strong podcasts around the community for people who are blind and for people who have, other disabilities. And I really have a problem with that. I think that we all need to work together around the podcast space to be able to create, a stronger podcast community where people can come up to my microphone, yours, Thomas' microphone, anybody's microphone, and be able to have great conversations. So that's, really me. And that's how I got into this. If I'm not podcasting, I'm actually an online teacher. I teach English as a second language. Let's see, I'm a bilingual guy, English, French. I love watching scary, creepy videos on YouTube and believing in fascinating conspiracy theories. But if I'm not doing that, I'm doing all those things. I'm trying to help people with disabilities and really everybody get onto Erin's Opinion and get into podcasting. So that's me in a nutshell. Both of you are very right. There are not enough podcasts that are truly geared towards not only to a disability audience, but are produced by people with disabilities. And I think that is a really important thing. So this is always a problem, that we can never have too many great podcasts. So yeah, I'm very interested in both of your podcasts. Certainly you should definitely share them around my community here at Erin's Opinion and things like that for sure. But absolutely. So the whole concept of, pod access though. So, you guys have a library, a website. I'm noticing, I've also noticed that, you have some following on social media platforms. But, anyway, walk through a little bit more about the engineering of pod access itself and how that really works.
Sure, sure. I think our goals sort of align with what you were just talking about, right? So it's not only about amplifying the voices that exist right now, but we're trying to encourage more voices, right? So
Precisely.
we also want to bridge the gap between the creators and the audiences, because I think that could be a really difficult thing. If you're someone who's interested in that content, you might not even know you're interested in the content. So it's about realizing who is out there, what are they talking about on their podcast, what's the subject, and then finding those who are interested in that subject. So that was a part of what we knew we were going into, or at least what we wanted to try to create. And so even that process, we know that we were podcasting, we had certain things that we were dealing with, but then there was also the idea that we had to learn more about other experiences from other people with disabilities. What was stopping them, or, what was in the way of them getting started. So, we created some surveys, and I don't know, Cheryl, you want to talk about the surveys? How we went
Sure,
about that?
happy.
Yeah.
Yeah, happy to. Because it's one thing to start with, okay, we need more voices out there and we need to amplify people more. But that the survey was really a neat way for us to find out from people, if you want to be podcasting, why aren't you? What are the barriers getting in the way? I mean, of course, in the survey, we also asked, what are you interested in? What are your hopes and dreams and, aspirations like that. But if pod access is going to be a resource to the community, then we need to know what are the resources you want. So we sent out surveys to current deaf and disabled podcasters, former podcasters, people who someday maybe aspire to start a podcast, and deaf and disabled people who are just podcast audience members. And we asked them about the challenges you're facing. What are the goals that you have? Also, if you do have a podcast, give us all your info, because we're going to open a podcast library, which we did. You mentioned, Aaron, it's on podaccess.net. There's the pod library. We also have, we asked people in the survey, what do you do? What are you good at? What are the skills that you bring to your own podcast or that you could bring to somebody else's? And that developed into our Skillshare library, where people are offering their skills for pay or barter. We don't get involved in the relationships, however people want to do it, but there are independent people and businesses. Maybe that's podcast production, editing, writing, graphic design, social media marketing, all that stuff. So we asked people to document their skills as well as the barriers to getting started. Thomas, what did I miss?
I think you got it all, Yeah, I think so. So after that survey, after that process, we learned a lot about what they wanted. And then, of course, we decided that one of the best ways to share that information about starting a podcast and answer some of the questions that we received on the survey was, drum roll, a podcast.
Yes.
So we created a podcast, 11 episodes. It's available today. Published in multiple formats for accessibility, of course. So we have a podcast, you'll get in your podcast app that also has transcripts, of course. You can find on the website, podaccess.net. We have videos with captions, and we have videos in ASL as well. And so that's not something that we see all the time, all of that access, but that was something that we wanted to sort of model, to say, hey, yeah, this is possible. So, these 11 episodes cover the basics of getting started in podcasting. So we talk about all sorts of topics that you need to consider: tools for recording, editing, distribution, branding, financing, right?
Oh, you left off one.
What's that?
Snacks.
Oh, of course, Scooby Snacks. Go check out episode 7 and you'll learn all about Scooby Snacks. And so, yeah, we have a little fun while we're creating this information, while we're passing that over. But yeah, the podcast has interviews with, at that time, were 10 future and current deaf and disabled podcasters. And they were all willing to share their experiences and their insight. And today, I think that group could best be described as current or former podcasts, because unfortunately that is a real thing in the community. And that's something that we definitely talk about and want to talk about more, which is normally called, not normally, but it's often called pod fading, right? We see podcasts that start and fade away. And so that's some of the things that we're trying to track. Why do you fade away? And, Pod Access wants to be a little helpful around that, right? About the challenges that we experience. And maybe I'll throw that question to you, Aaron. Are there any specific challenges that you've noticed over your 5 years that you've had to face in terms of staying with it, right? Retaining your podcast and continuing to produce it?
I have. I've noticed over the 5 years, I've noticed a lot. What I've consistently noticed is that two things. People in general have some people have a very short attention span, and you're very right that most podcasts statistically only last around 8 episodes, supposedly. Now, if you cross the 8 episodes threshold, well, then, I don't know, then you're doing good, I guess. But yes, it's very accurate. A lot of these podcasts only last between 8 to 10 episodes. So that's a accurate thing. Yes. Yeah. I think a lot of other people around the podcast space feel that the greatest barrier to entry is that they fear that they will never be heard at all. And, you never know, the most powerful and the most important listeners, or not necessarily the most important rather, but the most telling listeners to any podcast are the silent listeners, the people that secretly listen in the background. There's always a lot of those where we know they're secretly listening. They don't want to say anything, but we know that they secretly appreciate the content, so that's always an issue too. I think a lot of people are just very intimidated by the space. I think it's a space that has a lot of uncertainty for people, but considering that there's more and more podcasts and more people getting involved, you can really build your own brand. You can really build your own community. And that's really the power behind it, we at Aaron's Opinion, we have a lot of groups that you guys need to be in, obviously, but we have a lot of ways, a lot of global connection. And that's the thing. You can connect people through podcasting, and that's the power behind it all. But I don't know. I mean, I've seen that it is, from time to time, it's always hard to know how to reach out to people, how to maintain relationships with people over a period of time, how to build rapport. That's a very subtle thing, building rapport with people. A very subtle and very challenging thing for people with disability to understand rapport. So that's a huge thing. And then understanding to not, to look at your analytics, to look at how you perform, but don't take it too seriously, because the market is saturated with information. So to some extent, I believe my analytics, and as do you, but also, take it for what it is. There's an enormously high number of creation right now, an overly saturated marketplace. So who knows? There's also a lot of mystery. For some podcasts perform really well, and others are just never, for a variety of reasons, never get the download, But yeah.
Yeah. And even that, right? I think one of the things that we like to promote is that defining success is up to the individual. And so, you mentioned metrics and the statistics and all of that. I know because she and I talked about it. Cheryl doesn't care about her statistics. Do you, Cheryl? do you even look at them?
No, I vaguely remember what page they're on, on my host and on my website, but no, I don't generally look at that.
Yeah. And so that definition of success can be for some people all about just the process of creating and putting your voice out there. For some people, hey, if 2 people are listening to your podcast, that makes you happy. That's fine. You don't need more than that. And that's great. And so that's the thing. It doesn't have to be, I remember when podcasting first started, and it was just that concept, the idea that you could potentially reach as many people as whatever, but you're just sharing your voice. And if that's fine for you, then go ahead and podcast. If you don't have any sort of desire to be the number one on Apple Tunes, whatever the heck it's called these days, Apple Podcasts, right? If that's not your desire, then fine, just do it for whatever you want. And that's something I think Pod Access definitely wants to promote going forward.
That's really important for
Yeah,
sure, Because
absolutely.
for me, I know the trick is if you get one download, that's a lot when you really stop and think about that. Because then from one, it builds upwards. If one person's willing to save your episode, then that means two are, which means 4, 10. Next thing you know, you end up with thousands of saves. So it builds very quickly. But the trick is, as we say at Aaron's Opinion, help one person today, help 1 million people tomorrow, right? So the concept is if you only are able to get one listener, it is a success. And
Yeah.
that's the most subtle thing of all of it is one listener is a lot in this global workplace and the global economy for sure. Yeah.
One listener can definitely be a lot. And even that goes into what do you define as a lot? Because there's impact. That's the other thing around podcasts.
Precisely.
You can have, 100, 200 listeners, 10 listeners, but your impact, goes outside of your podcast. Maybe that goes into something else, right? I personally experienced that. And so that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
Like to me, that impact is really what my podcast is about.
Impactful and doing the right thing is what carries it forward.
Yeah.
Because people can secretly tell. If you're secretly doing the right thing and helping other people genuinely, people can tell. Also, if podcasts are being created and you're flaunting some dream or, promoting something that people can also tell when it's not genuine. And that line is a very subtle one too. So what I notice is that there's a lot of little factors. There's a lot of little pieces of basically tiny little details, little threads that you have to gently understand and unwind to truly get the true gist of this. So yeah, we will certainly at some point add Aaron's Opinion to your library if you want, certainly. But so tell me more if you can. Tell me more.
Oh, hang on.
Yeah.
Before we tell you more, Aaron's Opinion has been in the Pod Access library since you reached out to us. So you reached out.
I never knew.
Yes. Oh no. What? Well, if I did not DM you to let you know it was live, that is my mistake.
This is part of podcasting. You have to tell the other person because things are very subtle. We never would have known. I would have promoted it if I had known. That's interesting. Okay, good. Great to know. Okay. Well, good. So that's really good. Anyway, we'll get to that. But so who else is in the library and what are some of the other podcasters that you guys have worked with? I want to see if maybe I've interviewed some of them over the years.
So the podcast is definitely open. In order to do that, Cheryl, why don't you tell them how to go about getting into the library, checking it out or something?
Yeah, we have over 80. I'm pulling it up right now. We have over 80 podcasts listed in the Pod library, and the way to join it is what you had done is fill out our submission form. So if you go to podaccess.net. PODACCESS.net. There is a menu that's got a menu of all the pages on there, and there's a link on the homepage and also in the main menu called Join the Pod Library. So folks can pop over to that, fill out a form. People can upload their podcast artwork if they want, but you don't have to. And fill out that form. There's also a link to join the Skillshare, so to join that library as well. Of course, podcasters who also want to be hired by other podcasts, please fill out both the Pod library form and the Skillshare. And if things need to be updated, we do have an edit your listing link, another form that people can fill out. So it's all at podaccess.net.
Really excellent. All right. So, but back to what I was saying a moment ago, all is great. So what other podcasters have you guys interviewed on Pod Access? And I want to see, how many names I might recognize or who I've interviewed or, what they do around the podcast space.
Yeah. So definitely go to podaccess.net and check out the podcast. You'll see them all there. But, so there are a few that I can mention off the top of my head.
Sure. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah. So there is, so Ajani AJ Murray, we talked to him. AJ has a podcast called Acting Up with AJ and Crew, and that's a podcast around disability and pop culture. AJ completed his first season, has, probably over, I'm going to say, definitely over 10, 12 episodes out there, a couple of bonus episodes too. Interviewing other folks within that disability cultural space, some filmmakers, talking about movies and things like that from a disability perspective. Who else? There's Katsia Naki. Katsia runs Down to the Struts. Katsia is also blind and this is about disability design. How does she refer to that? It's all about disability design, I think. So looking at all sorts of things, but from that design perspective and how it affects disability and disability justice. She's sort of coming from that perspective. Has spoken to, she has about, she probably started during the pandemic too. So she's been out there for about 5 or so years. Let me see. Cheryl, anybody else come to mind? Who comes to mind?
Yeah. Who comes to mind is Antoine Hunter. His podcast is called Deaf Woke. So that's a video-based American Sign Language. It's in ASL because that is the main language he communicates with. So he does have ASL interpreters on there as well. So I think there's like back and forth between ASL and voicing. Endeavor. So Endeavor's show is not, I don't think it's in production anymore. It's called AAC Town. And at the time that Endeavor and Sam Vranazan started that podcast, they were the only podcast that they were aware of that was hosted and created by AAC users. So that's augmentative and alternative communication. So not communicating through speech. They both used devices that with speech generating devices to run their interviews and also to narrate and do the show. Not in production, but it's in the library, and there's a bunch of episodes from the past that are lovely. I've got more, but
I was going to say,
should I toss it to you?
The only one that, not the only one, but another one that comes to mind that I think shows a lot of this diversity of thought and disability and content. Maya, Cheryl, do me a favor, you said her last name.
Chupkoff.
Chupkoff, yeah. So Maya is Stutter. What's the name of it? Stutter? Not Stutter.
Proud Stutter.
Proud Stutter, right. So she's coming from that perspective, talking about for the Stutter community, and what that's all about. And so she's still doing that, going strong. Yeah. And folks have different ways to produce their podcasts. You know, some folks have some funding, other folks do not. So it's just it's a wide range of podcasters, different topics, different ways of producing. Some people have full teams. Some are individually doing it themselves.
Can I throw another one out?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Power Not Pity by Maxwell Joy Moore. And Maxwell tells some really cool stories about why Z started the podcast, the impact Z wanted to have, and then these beautiful stories about how they did get that impact. Like there is, I think it was a college class where the professor was using this podcast as like course material, really just elevating the importance of Maxwell's voice and perspective and the people Maxwell interviewed. And Z tells some really exciting stories about what success means and where the show has gone. What were we going to say, Thomas?
No, I was going to say that's that impact again, right? What we were talking about. That's definitely an example. Maxwell has a great example of that impact. So.
You know, that's all wonderful. The other really fascinating part about why I'm so pleased to hear of all these people is I have never heard of those podcasts before. So what's going on? You know, because that was a list of all people that belong here on Aaron's Opinion too, if they want, but I've never heard of them. You know, it's like, how are all these people hiding around the podcast sphere? That's a very odd thing. You know, I've never heard of them. Yeah, that's really good though. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think anybody's hiding. I think that's part of the issue with podcasts, right? There's 5 million or more. And so it takes a lot of time to find them. And so that's really what Pod Access wants to be of help with. So, you know, it's a lot easier to find those podcasts, by using a podcast library that's really looking for those folks. You can't go on to iTunes, and really search. You can put disability, or you can put a specific disability into as a search term, and then you might get something. But, you know, I know my own podcast, if you're just searching for the word blind, And if it was only looking for that result in the name of the podcast itself, you're not going to find that, right? I'm not going to show up. So maybe that was bad branding. You can check out episode 7 about branding.
I
But,
think,
that's
by
what
the
it
way,
is.
for the record, I think your branding is excellent. Both of you are very well versed in podcast branding. I wouldn't complain about anything. I think you guys are doing great.
I
Truly do.
appreciate that. I appreciate
Well, I mean
that.
it. Well, you don't need to appreciate it. It's true. But yeah, I mean, it does seem like a lot of there's such a wide, that's what I was saying before. There's such a wide range of choice that it can be very hard to find even the people that you want to interview because you have to know who they are, Yeah. So now we had Aaron's opinion, and later today, as time progresses, I will certainly share with you, both of you, my groups and the way that I build episodes outwards and the various ways that you can connect with my audience and other podcasters that I've already interviewed. But so what do you guys do for groups? Do you guys have like your own WhatsApp group, Facebook group, email lists, a groups.io thing? Because that's really important, lists and ways of connecting people appropriately. What does Pod Access do for that?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that, we mainly have our Substack, and so that's our newsletter, our monthly newsletter that we send out, and we have Instagram. Those are our main way, and the platform itself, of course, right? Pod Access. So yeah, again, it's one of those things where the community. It's in terms of our goals, right? We have some other things around building community that we're going to be doing in the future. But right now, those are the things that we can handle in terms of doing Pod Access, to start creating Facebook groups and stuff like that. First of all, I'm not a social media person too much. I'm not really crazy about going on to Facebook and doing
I
that.
am. I'm crazy about it. Let me tell you, I'm crazy, and I'm
do it all.
That's my niche.
Okay. Yeah.
So these groups can be really powerful because they can really connect very far, and there's a lot of tools in those groups. That's a huge tool. That's a huge toolbox. Yeah.
Yeah. So for folks who want to do that, but again, that goes into something that I think we also talk about. Occasionally we'll talk to folks who are interested in starting a podcast, and the advice that we would give them will be really understand yourself and know what you can do. Because one of the things that you don't want to do in terms of is to start something and then not be able to sort of continue it. So if that means you need to get a team, if you need a moderator for your Facebook group or something like that, these are all those things that we encourage folks to think about in advance of just kind of jumping in. There's nothing wrong with jumping in, but there are things that you're going to have to deal with at some point. So why not think about it in advance? So yeah. Go ahead, Cheryl.
Oh, no, please. Sorry.
No, I was just going to repeat. Go ahead.
Okay. I'll save you the effort of paraphrasing yourself. Do you remember? Oh, now I'm going to start singing that song.
I was about to do it too.
Do you remember? That was not the plan. Thomas, in my speaking, not my Earth, Wind, and Fire singing voice, do you remember we did a presentation over Zoom at the San Francisco Disability Cultural Center. There were attendees who were there on site and got to talk to each other. And then there was a whole gaggle of people like us who were on Zoom from different locations or even in San Francisco. And we had great conversation. We had a group activity. And if I'm remembering correctly, people jumped in the chat and started sharing contact info. And I believe some people in that group decided to start a WhatsApp or a Discord or something. That was what fired them up to make that direct contact. They had the energy, they had the know-how, and pretty sure they just did it. And we cheered them on. Yeah. We didn't, neither one of us has joined the group at this point, but having that group interaction really did pay off in that way, that the people who want that active connection just went out and made it with each other.
100%. Yeah, 100%. Yep. Yeah.
That's really important. Yeah. To build these various groups, and they can be powerful because that's another great networking tool. It's also a good analytic for building growth and understanding audience and understanding who the audience is. So yeah. And over the years that Pod Access has been on the market, what have you found to be, I understand, obviously I realize who the other podcasters around your network are, but who has been your audience, and what have been some of the reactions you guys have gotten from the public and the audience and things like that over the years?
Yeah, I think one thing that jumps out at me is just this summer, getting an email from someone who learned about Pod Access and just wanted to talk to us, in terms of, again, giving some advice about starting. And they had an idea, and we sort of walked through the process with them in terms of flushing out, asking some questions, giving them other things to think about, just like what we were just doing now, just talking. And then, it was just, what was it, September, when they reached out and were like, hey, we're launching the podcast. We have everything, we're moving forward with it and have a plan to launch on this particular date and doing X, Y, Z. So, that's really cool to be able to help someone do that, and bring another voice in. And they're, not here in the States. It was in New Zealand. And so they'll be launching their podcast, and, yeah, we're hoping that will be in the database, in the library, podcast library as well. So all those types of consultations, these are things that Pod Access is going to be doing more of in the future. Like Cheryl mentioned, that presentation that we did to, in San Francisco, more things like that. We have a lot of plans for Pod Access. I always
No,
Pod
say
Ask
it,
Us.
say it.
Pod Access, ask us.
Isn't it Pod Access? Can it be both?
Don't.
And just to clarify, Pod Access has not been on the market for many years.
Yeah.
We just came out this year in 2025, right? We've been planning it for a little while longer than that. Thomas and I have each had our own individual podcasts for over a decade each. So Read My Mind Radio and Pigeonhole have been around, but then coming together to start Pod Access, we're still really in the beginning of that, still very much growing both libraries. And I've gotten emails from people who love the newsletter, love the graphics, feel energized, feel their creativity energized by reading what we're up to. And I've gotten some notes of people who found the Pod Access podcast very compelling. I will say, Thomas, a lot of the feedback I get is, you and Thomas are so funny together. But also, you and Thomas are so fun and energized about what you're talking about that I want to listen to the whole thing and learn all this stuff. I've talked to people who don't really like podcasts, but find that they enjoy the Pod Access podcast because we're enjoying ourselves.
Good.
And yes, and we're showing off all these other deaf and disabled podcasters who are enjoying themselves too. Yeah.
Well, I mean, all the support you guys can get, all the support we can possibly get is great, even for people that don't like podcasts, but like listening to that particular conversation. I mean, that says a lot. That's very endearing. And that definitely says a lot. Yeah. Yeah. I don't like podcasts except for the one you do. That's cute. Yeah. No, I've never heard that before. It's very interesting. I think generally the type of person who listens to a podcast is usually someone who likes podcasts. Because I've never heard of someone who didn't like podcasting, but specifically took the time to listen to a podcast that they liked. I think that's interesting. That's silly and interesting at the same time. Yeah.
For me, it's about the relationship. Like, I will read a news article on a topic I'm not very interested in, so that I don't know, maybe I could have a conversation on it, but I sometimes will read it because I really like the writing or I admire the person who wrote it. And so I'm going to engage with something. I might forget it later because it's not a topic I have a lot of background in. But I think, Thomas, I think you and I are a brand. Like Pod Access is a brand, but I think Cheryl and Thomas is a brand. And people who know us, we also teach audio description training, culturally responsive, blind-centered audio description. We do these trainings, and so people know us from other places or through our work at Social Audio Description Collective, producing audio description. They're familiar with us as people in the space, and so, what are they working on next? And I think that's something that I really enjoy hearing about, just that curiosity. Oh, I've heard of this person. I've heard of this topic. Let me check out their podcast. I would love to hear more people who aren't necessarily podcast fans but they're encouraged by the people or the topics that they go and give it a try, you never know what ripples will come from that.
Exactly. And so I'm thinking maybe, Cheryl, we might be the gateway drug for podcasting, right? So I mean, it really is like that.
For the record, he said it, not me.
Yeah,
Just
no, I
saying. You're
definitely
being
said
recorded,
it. I'm owning that. I'm absolutely owning that, because think about it. There have probably been things in your life that you are not or were not interested in, and then something caught your attention. And then now you don't say, oh, I don't like that anymore, right? I know that. I've had that experience. Absolutely. I would love to be that. I would love to be a part of that for podcasting. And so if someone didn't like podcasts and now they heard ours, maybe tomorrow they're going to listen to one of our guests and listen and say, you know what? I was wrong. I do actually like podcasts. I just wasn't listening to the right podcast for me.
Yes.
There
And
you go.
then,
There
you know
you
what they're
go.
going to do after that? They're going to start their own podcast.
Ooh, yeah, let's go.
And on their way, they can contact us at thepodaccess@gmail.com, and they can check out the reference desk at podaccess.net, because there are tons of resources for starting a podcast, maintaining one, even different places to find funding. We're always building out the reference desk with more resources too when we find them.
Absolutely. And they can also email aaronsopinion6@gmail.com too. That's a good address to have too. And yeah, definitely. You'd be surprised who you can reach in many countries all over the world. And, you know, the thing I'm consistently noticing is that the stories that people are telling, because at Aaron's Opinion, we have a lot of people from overseas, all sorts of countries, but the stories they tell are shockingly similar to our stories that we tell here. Very similar experiences are had by people from country to country, not different. So that's always a very compelling and a very important thing to remember too. Yeah, absolutely.
Why is that shocking? Why is that shocking to you? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, I just thought, you know, that, and it's not really shocking to me now, but I meant, you know, when I got into the podcast space, I didn't really realize how everybody around the world who has a disability has a very similar experience. I would have thought it would have been slightly more different from country to country, but no, it's really just the same experience, just in a different country. And that's a really compelling thought and a really compelling thing that I've learned, you know, along the way too. Definitely. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, I see what you're getting at. And for sure, that's one of the things that has come out of doing my podcast, interviewing people with disabilities that are different from mine, is finding commonalities around things like facing ableism and other discrimination, but also accommodations. But I think another thing, in addition to what you said, Aaron, another thing that Thomas and I have found on our own podcast, as well as through Pod Access, is those differences between people and their experiences are also something that we love highlighting. So, for example, from the list of people like Endeavor, I've never, that's not true. I have had to rely on augmentative communication at times because I have a cyst on my vocal cords, and I used to have a much worse one. And there have been times where I can't speak. I have to rest my voice. Now, that's only 1 week of typing notes to people. So I'm not saying I know the life of a full-time AAC user, but it's an experience I could share with an AAC user. But I have never lived the life that Endeavor and Sam live as full-time AAC users. And so I want to know those differences. And, oh gosh, Maxwell Joy Moore is a Jamaican, Black, trans, queer, disabled person with a chronic illness different from mine, who lives in New York. I mean, so many differences. Maxwell and I don't walk through the world in the same ways, physically or culturally, like the way we respond to the world. And very importantly, I think the way the world responds to us is very different between me and Maxwell, and that is cool. And I love their podcasts and the different people they've had on. And so those differences, I love connecting to people through the similarities, but then I don't know, I just always want to highlight or acknowledge and enjoy the differences as well, because I'll never live the life of a Black, trans, queer person. And so I wouldn't want to erase the differences. I don't know, Thomas?
No, 100%. I think the fun thing for me at least, is, yeah, acknowledging the differences, but even within the differences, seeing yourself, right? So I think about another AAC user that was on my podcast, Lateef McLeod. And even in that, like, to me, the conversation ended up being, for this particular podcast episode, it was like, wow, I saw similarities to the respect and the care, that the way he talks about his device, the AAC device, and what it does for him. Well, I feel similar for my screen reader, right? That's also, in a sense, it's not an AAC necessarily because it's not talking for me, but that is the way I interact with it. That's the way I read my news, right? That's the way I communicate, well, with my computer and all of that. And so there is, or books, right? I read books through AAC, not an AAC device, but text to speech, or speech to text. And so, yeah. And so there you go. So it's like that there's a difference, but there is something that you can relate to even within there. So you're absolutely right, Cheryl. It's not just about the similarities, it's about the differences, but even in the differences, you can find some similarities.
Yeah. Oh, you've told that story before about, to me about what it was, not just hearing the conversation between you and Lateef, but then you kind of debriefed it with me once before. And I loved hearing it again because it's just so cool. It may seem like, oh, Lateef and I use different technology, but then in sharing the story on your podcast, in conversing with them, finding, oh, it's just so cool. I don't need to paraphrase back to you what you just told, but I love that story.
But I think like Aaron, I'm sure you're a screen reader user.
Sure.
Okay, so how many times when have you heard people comment about your screen reader when, oh, that's talking so fast, I don't understand it, blah blah blah, and it's almost like it's bothering them sometimes, right? That can, you might have had that experience, and it's like, okay, it might be bothering you, but I need this. This is my accommodation. So it's. I'm not necessarily saying it's a part of me the way other people might say, an amputee might say their prosthetic arm is them, right? Or a cane user. Sometimes folks say that, or wheelchair users say this is an extension of me. But it feels similar because I take that when somebody's telling me, oh, can you lower that down or what? Like, no, this is my need. And I'm not telling you to do anything about your need. And I think that's really important. And so I felt very similar to Lateef in that matter. So I don't know if you experienced that yourself, Aaron.
Certainly I have from time to time, not all the time, but I've heard that comment, or on the phone, people have commented, oh, the voiceover is, really, really fast or something. And then if I'm in France and I need to send someone a message in French or something like that, then the French voice of voiceover is even more spectacular and even more interesting to listen to. So, it just depends on the person. But people though, I have noticed that more and more people are using voiceover, whether they really need it or not. I think a lot of people find voiceover interesting and comforting too. So it just depends, on why they're using it. But
are they using voiceover or Siri?
Voiceover. Okay. I've heard it sounds odd, but I've heard from other people who are not blind, but I've heard that they turn on voiceover to hear how their message sounds. So I kind of think it's odd. It's interesting, but I've heard a lot of interesting stories about the use of voiceover over time, for sure. Yeah.
Well, that's access. I mean, that in general is access, right? So other people use access all the time. We know the curb cut effect, right? So the curb cuts were not produced for moms pushing, or dads pushing a stroller, or the UPS man, bringing the wheel truck, right? It wasn't built for them. It was built for wheelchair users, but we all do that. Same thing with captions in sports bars and all of that. So that's always the case. Other folks are going to use the access, and the more people recognize that, maybe the more respect we can put on some access. So.
Yes.
All right, I'll get off the soapbox and get back to pod access.
No, you're doing fine. No, absolutely, you're fine. Yeah. Both of you are correct about those observations for sure. Yeah.
So, I think one thing about pod access that we didn't talk about, you talked about, reaching out and getting folks onto Aaron's opinion, which is fine. By all means, go ahead, and the more possible. But another thing that podcasters can do, because I know, like for myself, I produce I produce seasonally and I produce in a theme. And so I'm really looking for things that fall within the theme. So I might not be able to just bring on anyone at any particular time. However, with Pod Access, what we want to promote is folks sharing promos of other podcasts. And so there's a checkbox on Pod Access for folks to indicate if they have a promo or if they're willing to share promos. So the idea there is like, Aaron, you might go on and you say, oh, I might want to interview this person. And maybe the person's not available. And they say, oh, well, would you share my promo? I'll share your promo in my feed and you share mine in yours. And that might be a way that folks can just kind of help each other out, right? So that's also available on Pod Access. It's just that promo share form. And even one of our episodes of the podcast, we talk a little bit about, promos and creating a promo and what that involves.
Yeah, we have that here at Aaron's Opinion. We have a promo.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah, and it's certainly useful when it's used appropriately. It definitely has its use. Yeah. When it's distributed at the right moment, it can be very powerful. Yeah.
Oh,
for sure.
What's the right moment? What's the right moment for Aaron's Opinion to be distributed? What do you think that is?
Now is the right moment. There's no better moment. There is no better moment than yesterday.
Okay.
And yesterday meant now.
All right. Well, please send us your promo. And if you have a transcript for it, send that as well. And Pod Access, we are not on social media regularly, but we are there. And we have shared already 2 promos of people who sent their promos to us, and we've shared them on Instagram. And we would be delighted to share yours as well. And I mean, I think, Thomas, on your podcast, Read My Mind Radio, I've definitely heard you insert other people's promos during your episode.
Yeah,
but
100%.
I'm not as diligent as making my podcast as you are. So there have been several times where my entire episode for the month was just someone else's promo. Like you get my intro and it's like, and here's a cool podcast to check out. And then there's the promo and that's the end of my episode. And I was just tickled that I had absolutely no ideas and still was able to put out an episode because somebody else made it. And it promoted somebody else's show. So they're like 30 seconds to a minute is a great length. I think we've seen some that are maybe closer to 2. But I love hearing people like highlight past episodes or previews for what's coming up in the next season, all that stuff. Any of the Aaron's Opinion audience, if you're podcasters and you have promos, send them to Pod Access, especially if they're already transcribed. If not, we will do that and share those on social media.
Absolutely. Super good. Super good. Yeah. All of that is really, really important. Yeah. I noticed, I would say over time, you guys, might want to build up your social media as, have some social media presence. Websites are great. Podcasting is great. The emails are great. Substack is great, but more with the socials, more with the TikTok and the Instagram and things like that would be.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
Well, we do Instagram, but yeah, TikTok. I don't even consider TikTok being social. I feel like that's just another platform. But yeah.
Yeah, we're on Instagram and LinkedIn at this point, and honestly, so the staff, I use staff in very loose quotation marks. The staff of Pod Access is Cheryl and Thomas, and with our skill set, our interests.
Don't forget Ruru.
Oh my, I did literally forget Ruru. Shout out to Ruru, the podcat. He's literally a cat, but I call him my office manager and he's the official mascot of Pod Access, the podcat. Thank you for the shout out to Ruru. He thanks you. But Thomas mentioned this earlier about knowing what you want, knowing what your strengths are and knowing what you want to do. We are really big on setting goals that we know we're going to achieve. And we know we're not going to be on social media once, twice a week, every single week throughout the year. So we don't even set it as a goal. And I'll just speak for you, Thomas. We're happy. We're happy about it.
Definitely speak for me.
Because we're meeting our goals. So when I remember to go on Instagram, I throw a nice little graphic and image description up on Instagram. And I am proud of myself for the week about that. So
I totally get it. Yeah, no, that's fine. That's a really good answer. Yeah.
We have so much fun producing the podcast and coming up with ideas for next workshops and consulting on other people's shows. And we're having so much fun and satisfaction from that. And I mean, we do want to hire a social media manager. Uh, we'd be delighted with an intern for now, but we have plans to hire someone who feels really strongly about their skills and interest in that area. And when we get to that point, that's the direction we'll grow with that.
Excellent. Really, really good. Yeah, no, I tell people all the time you have to set realistic goals. So I think you guys setting realistic goals that you enjoy achieving, I think that's absolutely right. Yeah, that's really, really great.
Yeah, yeah. I think it reminds me how, again, I kind of refer to the early days of podcasting, and today it's so different and so much like everything else that happens when a new product comes out. It ends up turning into big business. And I get it. This is a capitalist society. I get it. Um, and today, it really does seem like everybody and their mother has their own podcast, but our voices in terms of this community, the deaf and disabled community, our voices are still highly underrepresented. And I think today, the environment of the world today, I think it's even more important that we have that representation. So, that's what Pod Access is really sticking to as opposed to anything else. I mean, we really want to just promote that and build that. That is our main goal. And everything else after that is great, but that's a real big goal of ours.
Yeah, I like the way you said that.
Thanks, Cheryl.
Really good. Excellent. Okay. Well, very good. And what do you guys like to do in your spare time, free time when you're not doing all this great pod access stuff? In addition,
What is
apart
that?
from and in addition to your own podcast, what are some of your crazy, interesting hobbies that you guys like to do?
Does not compute.
It does not compute.
Spare time.
What? Oh, I'm so glad we're recording because I've got some. I hope that you will sample that in your next podcast. That was beautiful. So Pod Access and our own podcasts are not our main work. Thomas and I both work full time. So I'm doing captions, I'm doing audio description. Thomas and I co-teach classes and give presentations. We have a book chapter coming out soon about mentorship and podcasting from deaf and disabled perspectives. I didn't list your work because I don't want to speak for you, Thomas, but you work full time. So my hobby, I volunteer at a farm and I take care of the chickens mostly.
I'm fascinated by chickens. Birds are I have a huge fascination in reptiles and birds. So that is so fun. I love that. Yeah.
That's cool. Yeah, I mean, for me, I've been more intentional about shutting down on like a Sunday, and even to a certain extent at a certain time on a Saturday.
Good.
And so, yeah, just been doing it. I dabble in some other things and some musical things, some guitar, have some other hobbies, but yeah, it's everything Cheryl talked about. So doing a lot of that work. And that's the thing about that is I do enjoy all of that. And so I don't necessarily think of it as the work, but
Sure.
yeah, but spare time is, whoo, you got to make it. You do have to
Yes.
make it. So, yeah.
Absolutely. As we walk to the end of the episode today, I want to thank both of you for coming. This has been a fabulous conversation, but I certainly want to say to each of you, I want to let each of you ask me one question one question to really make me sweat to see if I'm worth my salt as a podcaster. What do each of you want to ask, and what do you guys really want to know about Aaron Richmond and Aaron's opinion?
You want to go first, Cheryl?
Yeah, I don't think I'm up for that challenge. I don't think well on my feet. I don't have a question to make you sweat, prove yourself. But I would love to know, you mentioned that you started your podcast in the height of the pandemic. I just want to hear why. What is it about the pandemic or the environment we were in then that led you to start this podcast?
It was at the end of my guide dog's life, for one thing. And I was still doing, just like I am today, still doing online teaching as an online teacher. And I was listening to a lot of podcasts around the blindness space, but I noticed that they weren't really receptive to my opinions, and they didn't really want to interview me, and they didn't really want to talk, and they weren't really, in my opinion, they weren't really reflective of what I want to see in the ecosystem. So what I did, I went to Facebook, and there's many groups for blind people and people with disabilities, and I kind of started answering people's questions. In other words, people would post questions in those groups, and they would say, should I get a guide dog? Should I go to university? Should I do this? And what I would do is I would create an audio file, a memo, and just for fun, I would send it back to them as a PM. And then over time, it occurred to me that that's like a podcast, because I'm talking and the other person is needing knowledge or needing me to answer a question, and they're like the audience. So then that's how I built the show, because I love talking. I can't shut up. And I really love giving other people knowledge and helping other people. And that's really why. And just podcasting is so positive. So that's truly why. That's the why. And then the how is keep doing it. So that's the answer.
That is a cool story. Oh my gosh. Thomas, do you have your question?
Yeah, I guess, again, I'm not trying to make you sweat, Aaron. We're trying to build community here. I don't want to do that to you, man. But I do, you mentioned that you speak French, and I'm wondering, do you translate your podcast into French?
I do not. So I've had a couple French people, very few. The joke about, well, there's many silly things, but French people are very shy in the podcast space. I've only had like two or three people over the 5 years who are native French speakers. Let's see. I interviewed a man who invented a mobile application that helps blind people play crossword puzzles. I interviewed him. He's a French guy. And then I interviewed another person from, a country in Africa called Burkina Faso. Mm-hmm. And I interviewed him in French. So I've done a couple French interviews, but very few. That's the funny thing. I've noticed that the countries in Europe are not seeming to participate nearly as much in the podcast sphere. So I have noticed that they're a lot more insular and a lot shyer, about reaching out and having global conversations. So yeah, but yes, I've had many, but no, the podcast is not translatable in French, but, YouTube, where this video ends up to, YouTube has like, what's it called? Like a dubbing, an auto dubbing that I turned on. There was videos telling creators to turn on auto dub. So we have auto dub. I've never actually seen it in action, but it exists. And then people can always use the transcript that's created, and they can always translate that probably in other languages. So it probably is happening. It's just not visible. It's subtle. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Cool. Very good. Very good. Well, appreciate the invitation to join you here on Aaron's Opinion.
Well, I love talking. I love talking to both of you. So, by the way, if someone wants to get in touch with both of you, how can you guys be reached?
You want to give the info, Cheryl?
Yeah, email is thepodaccess@gmail.com. And on Instagram, we're at thepodaccess. I do not remember what we are on LinkedIn, but we're still called Pod Access. So podaccess.net has all the links as well.
Excellent. Yeah, on LinkedIn, you can just search for Pod Access. I think it's linkedin.com/pod-access or something like that. But just search for Pod Access. You'll find it.
Sounds great. Absolutely. All right, everybody. Well, actually, if both of you could stay on the line for just another 30 seconds. Sure. But at this point, I want to thank both of you from my heart to yours. Thank you for such a great conversation about Pod Access and all the great stuff both of you do around the podcast world. So absolutely. Anyway, everybody, thank you so much for joining us. Get in touch with Pod Access, and we'll see you next time. So, of course, thank you for joining us today. And until next time, help one person today, help 1 million people tomorrow.